Did you know that readers are leaders? I am a firm believer of that, and I want to share with you one of the books that I have enjoyed tremendously in the last few months. This is a book written by a friend, and most of all, someone that I respect immensely. The name of the book is The Rest of the Man's Show, and it's a deeply personal and powerful memoir that chronicles Pastor Bill Lamorey's transformation from brokenness to redemption and ultimately to a life of purpose and leadership. And this book is going to help you have the practical wisdom and spiritual practices and mindset shifts so that you can heal, grow, and lead a life of significance. So check it out. You can grab it on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold. And I would love for you to support this incredible individual. Remember, The Rest of the Man's Show.
The Rest of the Man Show offers inspiration and instruction to help you push forward. Releasing April 8th. Get your pre-order now so you can be inspired with one of the most fascinating stories of brokenness, redemption, and transformation.
I didn't write this book just to tell my story. I wrote it to also help you tell yours. Bill Lamorey from The Rest of the Man Show. Welcome to Casa De Confidence, a podcast for you. You'll hear some incredible women
And some awesome, cool dudes
going confidently in the direction of their dreams and living in the purpose of their heart.
You're our host,
Julie DeLucca-Collins, and you are our sidekick. # handsome hot husband.
That again.
And the producer of the show.
That I am.
I am an author, speaker, coach, dreamer, and most of all,
We help people go in the direction of their dreams.
and support them on their purpose. So pull up a chair
Grab a drink.
and make yourself at home because our casa
Is your casa. Welcome back and welcome to the latest episode of Casa De Confidence.
So excited to be here, Daniel Collins. Look at us.
I know. This is a big day today.
It's a big day. Well, you know what? It's always a big day when it comes to us sharing incredible stories in this podcast.
Well, it's a big story today, and it's it's personal to me, personal to you, because we know firsthand our guest today.
Yeah, he's your cousin.
What is it? My cousin from Connecticut?
Your Connecticut cousin. Why don't you explain that?
I will. When Julie moved to Connecticut 6 months after we were married,
Yeah, it was the weekend wife.
you were a weekend wife for a little while,
Mhm.
we started to look for a church, and we found a church called Calvary Fellowship.
That's right. I Yelped it.
You did Yelp it. It had 5 stars.
It had 5 stars. And the recommendation from a girlfriend who lived here in Connecticut, and she had started attending.
Well, then we started attending, and we have found an incredible community. Now, you may ask, what does this have to do with Connecticut? Well, the pastor's name was Bill Lamorey, and if you haven't figured it out yet, yeah, he's our guest today. And
Mhm.
Bill is releasing his book. He actually released it on April 8th, 2025, just in case you're listening to this from the future,
That's right.
right?
So future. Only Gen X will get that.
Little side story about the church. Bill and his wife, Rebecca, had come up from Florida to start this church, and they had done that. And as far as I knew, Bill is a Floridian. But in speaking to Bill, right, Julie?
Mm-hmm.
In speaking to Bill, I found out that he was originally from Connecticut. He was not only from Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
he was from my hometown.
He's from your neck of the woods.
He's not just my neck of the woods. He was from the same town, which is hilarious because I don't meet that many people out in the wild
Mm-hmm.
that are from the same town as me, because I was born, raised in northeastern Connecticut with, a few stops in Maine, come back to Connecticut. But anyway, neither here nor there. Yeah. called The Quiet Corner.
Well, and go ahead. You can say, you can
It's
go.
called The Quiet Corner. And you know what? It's a salt of the earth kind of area, more country. It's not the Connecticut that people think of when I think of those like 1980s excess movies. We're not driving BMW. Well, at least back then, we weren't driving BMWs and Porsches around. We're driving tractors.
Well, in my high school, they were. Not that I drove one, but in high school, they
your
were.
high school is a lot different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow,
that is true.
It turns out that me and Bill are from the same hometown.
Not only that, but we found out that Bill and his wife, Rebecca, and their kids had gone to a family party. And the family party just happened to be, where is their family?
It happened to be our family.
At Dan's family farm, or his sister. No, his niece.
My niece.
Your niece.
My niece's husband's farm.
That's right.
So,
and
which was
that's where they were.
Because it was weird because she was describing our weekend to Bill's wife, Rebecca. And Rebecca's like, "Is this a farm? You come on the farm and then you go down over this little bridge and there's a pond." And we were like, "What?"
Yeah,
you're at my niece's house. We are getting way off track here.
Oh, is that something new here at Casa De Confidence?
So, all right.
Listen, why does that episode matter? Let's really unpack that.
Mm-hmm.
For us, knowing Bill and understanding his journey and knowing that this has been something that was in his heart for a long time really means a lot to us to be able to support him. And, we support people and their dreams, right? This is Casa De Confidence. But more importantly, this story is raw and is filled with grace. From addiction to being in jail to then leading a church, which sometimes being in jail and leading a church, seem like two different parts.
And I don't want to sensationalize too much either, but he knew Marilyn Manson.
That's correct. He talks about his relationship with Marilyn Manson.
For those that don't know, that is it's a musician, not the other one.
Well, and again, the episode where Bill and I discuss the book and talk about how he got here and some of the intention in writing this book and what the book is all about, it's very gritty, and at times it's funny, but also is full of hope. In the times where things may seem so topsy-turvy, hope is the one thing that we can really grasp on. Because here's the thing. The thought that we have in our brain is creating our reality. It creates our actions, our feelings. And if we lose hope, then we're putting ourselves in a place in which we are going to be disheartened. And it's difficult to keep going in this journey to confidence. And our pastor, our friend, has inspired us. And Bill has been there for so many of our personal times, when Dan's brother died, when my dad died, when, again, I lost my job, and Bill and I talked about that. So there's a lot of different things that we unpack, but more importantly, we want you to get to know someone like Bill, and this is what we hope to bring you, something that inspires you and helps you along in your journey.
The one message that I love that Bill gives is, we grew up thinking that we had to earn our way into God's graces, but that's not how it works. God gives his grace freely, and we have to understand that we don't earn our way to God. God gives his grace to us so we can stand up in his presence. This book is incredible. This is the thing about Bill. When we went to any of his services, it was always an incredible story. He's one of the most incredible storytellers. God's blessed him with that talent, the talent to get a message across in maybe an angle you didn't see coming. Keeps you on your toes.
You're making me miss him at our church.
And this is the thing with Bill.
Bill, come back.
He's been graced with this talent, but he's very humble about it.
Yeah.
And you know what? You're going to hear the interview next between Bill and Julie, but what I encourage you to do is go get his book, The Rest of the Man Show, and you'll hear an incredible story from an incredible storyteller.
Yeah. And, Bill never forgets where he came from, and everything that he does, whether it be writing or when he is relating to us, he does it with humility, humor in the heart, and always, always showing up for others. And here's the thing, my friends. We are all going to, from time to time, rebuild our life. We've been there. And in this book, Bill really talks about why the rest of your story might be better than anything else that you've lived so far. And when you think that this is the worst thing that is happening, it could be the best thing that leads you to the life you've imagined.
It's probably killing Bill, us saying all these nice things about him.
Yeah, it's killing him.
You know what? Coming from Bill, though?
Yes.
He said this is not a story about him, but it's a story about God.
And I'd love for you to hear this interview, check out this conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as we did.
All right. I think it's time.
Okay.
On to Julie and Bill.
Let's take a quick break.
What does it really take to build and grow a successful business?
Poor cash flow management. That's what kills businesses. What kills cash flow plans are when the unforeseen expenses pop up.
That's Mark Zweig and Eric Howerton, entrepreneurs who have spent decades building, scaling, and advising businesses across industries. Now, they're bringing their experiences straight to you on Big Talk About Small Business, where real entrepreneurs share real lessons, real strategies, and the truth about what it takes to succeed. Listen to Big Talk About Small Business today, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to another episode of Casa De Confidence. For me to have people that I know in real life, it's always an incredible treat. And my next guest is someone who has had a great influence in my life, and it's really fun to be able to connect with him in this period of his life, specifically because it's an exciting time. And I really want you to get to know this individual, his heart, and how much he is really sharing with all of us to help us become the person who God is calling us to be. And I hope that in this conversation, you can find some nuggets and you can find some inspiration, but most of all, the steps to go confidently in the direction of your dreams. I want to introduce to you my friend and my pastor who moved to Florida on us, but Bill Lamorey is here today. And Bill is husband to Rebecca and the father of 3 lovely daughters who I had the pleasure of having on Sunday school, which was always really fun. He has a background in business, but he has worked for more than 25 years in ministry and haven't been someone that was in ministry before. Certainly, I know some of the different challenges and things that come when we are in that spotlight. And for us, definitely informs what we do, how we do it. And Bill is launching a book. This is one of the reasons I wanted to share him with you. He is launching a book that I have been so excited for him to launch. And we'll talk about it. But let's get to talking to Bill. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, Julie, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Well, listen, I cannot believe you finally made it to the podcast. It's been so fun. And for those people that heard me say that you are my pastor, but you're not here in Connecticut. You're in Florida. How did you end up in Florida? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I was actually born in Connecticut, but when I was 9, my mom and stepdad moved to South Florida. So I decided at the time it was a good idea to go with them. But then I was there until 2005 and really felt a call with me and my wife to start a church in my home state. And after praying and seeking where we should do that, West Hartford, Connecticut made the most sense. So in 2005, we started a church. And honestly, it was one of the greatest privileges of our lives to do that work, to pioneer, not knowing what's going to happen, but you step forward because you felt a vision and a call and a nudge, all the things when you launch, how it is to launch something. You don't know, you're not guaranteed success, but success is the obedience in a sense. It's this, not the outcome. It's moving forward into that. And so we did that, and God did bless it in Connecticut. Not known to be super friendly for churches in New England many times. I had friends that said, hey, when you go out there, remember, New England is like a graveyard for preachers. So, super encouraging, right? But I did have a lot of encouragement along the way. And God bless it. We grew into a church that, what a wonderful community of people such as yourself and Dan and many others that we just came to love and did life with and ministered for 18 years and watched God blossom the church and influence the community and help other churches and coach them as they were getting started. So it was a great blessing. But what brought us back, because funnily enough, I thought we were going to be there until we retired. I thought I had like another 15 years out there. And then at that point, I knew we'd return to Florida because I owed Rebecca the beach by that point. But it was life. Life is crazy. We know 2020 was nuts. We know, and anyone in any type of leadership position, it just had it a little bit more challenging because not only, as we went through 2020, it was hard for everybody, but as a leader, you're responsible for a group of people. And as a church, we were suddenly kicked out of the place we met at for a year. So we were moving people around. Our church is fairly multicultural. And so we're navigating some of the racial tensions with George Floyd that year, political tension, Trump versus Biden. Upset a few folks along the way. And then, of course, masks, no masks, vax, no vax. Everybody had an opinion. Everyone was upset. Everyone was scared. And so navigating that. So I was fairly worn out by the end of 2020, but feeling like, okay, we might be turning a corner. And then we had a personal crisis. My wife, Rebecca, who's awesome, has struggled for many years with seasonal affective disorder. And it just got harder and harder every year. We did many things to try to manage and cope with it. But she, at the end of 2020, just had a complete mental, emotional breakdown. And she's allowed me to share her story. She's a very private person. She wants other people to be able to talk about things that are difficult, like many times people don't want to lean forward with depression or challenges like that. But she hit that point, and I sent her to Florida for 2 weeks because her family lives down there. And when I came a couple weeks later, it was night and day. It was as if you had taken a wilted flower and replanted it in good soil, and it came back to life. And it was my wife again. It was the person I knew. But then she made it clear that she was very close to making a permanent decision that would have been awful. And so I knew I couldn't leave my wife in that situation. So trying to take a long story and move it right along, I made the decision that I wasn't going to, she had fought valiantly at the time for 16 years, and I wasn't going to put her through that again. So we made the decision, and that summer we moved my family back to Florida on the West Coast, this side, Sarasota. And then, that meant until we were able to transition the church, because we didn't have plans for it. Again, I thought I was going to be there for more than another decade. We had no transition plans or anything like that, no succession. So what we had to do was I traveled 3 out of 4 Sundays a month, flying back and forth from Florida to do the services. And over time, we came to realize it's not really sustainable. So we found a great new pastor, and September 2023, gave my last message at the church. Josh took over the church, doing a great job. And we began kind of a journey that none of us had planned. The phenomenal news is Rebecca's doing amazing. She is
Yeah.
just blossoming and doing well. And kudos to her for fighting the good fight for so long. But I'm glad to see that's a fight that she doesn't have to continue doing any longer. So
Yeah.
that's what brought us back. It was certainly not in our bingo card for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, it's never in your bingo card. And, and I have to say, so many different levels of the story where I kind of have seen a lot of this happen. Rebecca, her story is very meaningful to me in the sense that I also have seasonal affective disorder. We've talked about it, and Rebecca has been encouraging in the fact that she, who is a private person, knowing this,
Mm.
share this, and allowed everyone to kind of get a glimpse into that, reminded me and allowed me, as I started this podcast, because it was kind of around the same time, that the power is in our story. And I always known that. But for someone who also suffers with seasonal affective disorder, I knew that I needed to be able to say that, not because, oh, look at me, but because I know how it impacted me to know that I wasn't alone, that this can happen to anyone, in that you're not going crazy. Because that's the one thing that you kind of think, like you're going
Yes.
crazy. And yeah, so I always will be very grateful to Rebecca for that. I will always also be very grateful to you as the leader of the church that we went to. When Dan and I first got married, I moved here from New York City, and I don't know if I've ever told you the story. I started to look kind of on the online for a church, and we're both grew up Catholic, but we know we didn't want to go back to a Catholic church. And I think I found you on Yelp. And I remember thinking, I don't know. And I had been going to the Journey Church in Manhattan in very similar approaches to worship and to teaching. And I was hesitant, right? And then Dan said, I don't know, it's in West Hartford. And I said, well, I want to go to West Hartford every Sunday.
Yeah.
And then a friend of ours went, and we decided to meet her. And from the moment that I walked in, I said, okay, this is it. This is where we're going to be. And it certainly was an amazing experience to be able to be embraced by a family. And that was the one thing that I just loved, because I was new to Connecticut. And as most of us, right, we have that need to belong. And the church and the ministry and the work that you did definitely created this environment for many of us. So thank you for that. And now for another thing that the listeners who have been with us for a while, some of them may know your name, because I often talk about you, Bill. And I talk about how you had been incredibly instrumental, and you were one of the people who was on the call for, we had home fellowship groups, and we were online in March because we had gone online.
Yeah.
And that's the day that I got laid off. And I came in, and I wasn't going to share it at first. And of course, my friend Erica shared it, and you led us through a prayer, and it definitely helped me know that I was not alone, and then there was a plan, and I needed to just trust it. And yeah, so thank you for being part of my journey as well in that sense.
Well, I appreciate that. I didn't know that to that extent, but I'm happy to hear that. And what I love is that as much as you came in, and Dan saying, we need community, we need a family to belong to, and found that, and found help in your own journey, you were also that for many other people, including myself. I know we'll get to it, but you were one of the ones years ago that tapped me on the shoulder and said, you should write a book. And I said, I've been thinking about it. You're like, well, you should do it. And so it wasn't mean, or it was just like matter of fact. I'm like, yeah, I should do that. Now, it took me a while to come around a few years later, but I never forgot that. And so not only that, but even as you said, you served as a teacher in the Sunday school class, working with the kids. I think that's the cool part about community, is it's never about just what can I get out of it? It's what can I contribute? Not only how can I be blessed, how can I be a blessing? And that's how you get the most out of any experience in community. And you guys did that. So it's cool to see that it kind of it was reciprocal.
Well, We certainly, we've been remiss. We've been going to church in this side of the river. For those people who know Connecticut, there's the one side of the river. And
Isn't it funny how that's like a barrier?
it's a barrier. It's so crazy.
It's like the blood versus the Crips to cross the Connecticut River. It's a very, very short difference. It's weird. I never quite got that, but it is. It is cool.
It's so crazy. And especially because you grew up in South Florida, as did I, for some very formative years. And you just drive. You just go wherever you need to go. It's not, and again, coming from New York City as well, people that say, oh, that's so far, it's 20 minutes away. And I'm thinking, no, it's not.
Exactly.
But I guess it's what you're used to. And so the one thing that I want to say is that I remember also very vividly these moments, right? They kind of stay in your mind. I remember sitting at church one day, and you're a storyteller. You're a wonderful storyteller. And one of the things that, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, kind of remind me of Ralph Poyo, who was our youth minister. And you have a very similar way of just bringing the message through a story, but really framing the conversation. And I remember just sitting there and I thought, Bill needs to write a book with all these stories. and I said that to Dan as we were leaving, and he's like, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "I'm going to go tell him." And he's like, "Don't tell him anything." And of course, I don't listen to what he says mostly. So I really felt that it was one of these things, right? That it's just the pressing need to tell someone something. And I want to encourage the listeners that anytime that you have this feeling or this thing that is just in your heart, you got to share it with people, because you don't know where it's going to lead, whether they pursue what you're saying or not, or it makes that difference for them in that moment. I think that that's very important. But I want to dive into your book, because there's a lot of things in there that, of course, I've heard, but so many others that I had never heard. And it was a deeply personal look into the journey of a broken person, like many of us are. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story in your childhood, if you're open to it, and how that framed the next era of your life, your childhood, that brokenness, your relationship or paternal relationships, right? And how that influenced you.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with the book is I realized that, the first half is story. It happens to be my story, but then the second half is all sort of practices of growth and healing. But I realized that for the book to have an impact, I had to lower the guard and make it basically be very uncomfortable in some ways, in exposing and expressing and being kind of raw and real. And so in that first half of the book, but the first half of that, I get into brokenness. The second half is redemption. But on the brokenness side, I talk about some things that for some, I think everyone can relate to something, because I grouped them by themes rather. It's not like a biography, like this happened and this. Right. It's more like themes.
That's what I love about it. It keeps my brain kind of intent and listening, because you sharing and not in that chronological time. But I love that.
Yeah. And for me, I need to be able to pay attention. And I'm trying to think, if I don't know a person, I'm reading a story, do I really want to read every nook and cranny, or do I want to kind of identify along with themes? And you probably saw this, chapters are real short, because I want to keep people's interest. Like you only have a few minutes. Okay, I can get a chapter in or something like that. But so from that, there's themes that are in there that, for example, family. And when you're young, your parents are the moon and the stars, and you have an image. You come to realize that there's sometimes more, but beneath the surface that's going on. I get into the idea that many in my family come from addiction, alcoholism, or drug abuse, and what that's like. I talk about growing up without without a dad. He died when I was very young, and talk about that. And when I was 5 years old, but then a stepfather who is abusive to my mother, and the idea that instead of having any a good father figure, going from nothing, went to the antithesis of what that should be, and kind of learned impressions along the way from there, and how that eventually sorted out. Talk about how, because as an only child, didn't have a dad, a loving mom. I can't say enough good things about my mom.
Absolutely.
So,
We can talk about Fran all day. She's amazing.
yeah. So I want that to be super clear. But, I didn't know how to process a lot of sort of early traumatic things that I had begun going through. So one of the themes that I talk about is escapism. And for me, that's something I have to watch. It could be anything. It could be music. It could be TV. It could be, later drugs, it could be video games. And again, with some of those things, they're not wrong in and of themselves. But when you're using certain things to escape rather than processing and dealing with things, it's ultimately not helpful to your soul long term. And you get it, you do it because you don't know what else to do, and you don't have the tools. Part of the reason I wrote this book is it's the book I wish I had in some ways to guide me, to help me understand some things. So I hope it's helpful for someone else. But in those themes of brokenness, I get into the idea that I had sworn off drugs as a kid because I saw, man, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Look how harmful it is. But sure enough, I go down that road and get into some serious trouble, some serious addiction. I get into my crazy days hanging out with the guys from Marilyn Manson, who I met in your old stomping grounds in Miami, became friends with them, and sort of an interesting time and season for my life. But it's one of the guys in the band that I ended up first doing hard drugs with, and kind of the journey down that road. Lost a lot of good friends, him and others along the way. And then finally, the section of brokenness in the book ends with me facing criminal trouble, having already gone to jail for a couple months, facing more time after that, and ending up in a place called Calvary House, which is a Christian rehab I didn't want to go to, but I only agreed to because my mom said she wouldn't bail me out of jail unless I went there. So kudos to you, Mom, for holding your guns on that one. And in that place, I went really thinking I'm just going to lay low, kind of do the Jesus thing for a little while. So make everyone happy, and then get out and go back to whatever the heck I wanted to do. But God kind of got the last laugh, and I get into how he really broke through. And I began that journey, not really knowing what was next, but turning towards the light. And earlier I talk about encounters with God and trouble I had with the church, things that a lot of people can, maybe even people that listen to your podcast now, they have issues with church. I had them too. And I kind of get into what all my issues were, and navigating through that. But at the end of that section, we get to the point of brokenness, but hope, which is carried through. And the foil is the other side when we move into redemption. I don't want to jump too far ahead of that, but I don't know. I did wonder, and I know you've started going through it, is as people read that brokenness section, how much is relatable to people that haven't gone through the exact same things, but maybe find something that they can connect to. And what's interesting to me, I guess I'll find out when it's unleashed upon the world shortly, is do people connect more to the story? Because I always like story, or to the principles and the practices in the second half of the book. I guess that maybe that's a very personal thing.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question for the listeners. And, for anyone who is listening, and this is the one thing that I really loved about the book. I've read a lot of ministry books, a lot of Christian pastors, and there is the faith, your story is ingrained in the pages, but it's a story that someone who maybe is not in church, a Christian, can really identify with that, because redemption from whatever we are going through is a common theme for many of us humans. And there's always a point in which there is a turning point from wherever we may be going through. The one thing in your book is that, again, it's relatable for others. Would you describe what that redemption felt like? And did you know it was going to be possible for you to turn from the life that you were living?
It's an interesting thing. It's a great question, because for me, I felt like the redemption began when I turned around and said, okay, God, I don't know that you can fix this. I
Yeah.
don't know that you can unbend the path, so to speak, but I'm going to trust you. And I believe you're the one I've been pursuing, even though I've been fighting you every step of the way when I look for meaning and hope. And so it was, I think the point of surrender was that turning point. But even as I share, I didn't fully know what God could do. I still had so many broken pieces. One of the stories I share is when I was in Calvary House, this guy, Rick, and I'm still, and as you read through the book, it probably doesn't read like a lot of Christian books, because I try to relate to where I was at the time and be real to that and not gloss over it. And so there's a lot of rawness to it. But I remember even fighting some of the guys that were trying to help me. This guy, Rick, takes my face and presses it up against a painting on the wall. And he says, "What do you see, Bill?" And I said, "I see dots, Rick. I see dots." And he said, "Step back a few feet." And he said, "What do you see?" And I said, "Oh, I see a ship at night. It looks like it's leaving the harbor. It's, it looks like it's out for an adventure." He says, "That's your life right now, Bill. All you see is dots because you're pressed up against it. And all those dots represent the junk, the garbage, the brokenness, all the things you're dealing with. But in the perspective of time, God can make sense of these, and all of these dots, all these broken things, God will use almost like a mosaic in a beautiful picture." And so that was kind of the first time that I thought of that perspective about God taking broken things and not only just fixing them, but putting them into something that is a thing of beauty. That's why I say a beautiful, gritty story, because it's gritty, but it's also the broken pieces that kind of put together make it beautiful in God's hands in a redemptive sense. And so to further answer, did I know he could do that? I began to get a picture that maybe he could, but I looked at, well, I had legal issues still. I had no sense of identity and like all the junk that I had dealt with. How is he going to work through depression? How is he going to work through shame? How is he going to work through addiction? And now that I had a criminal felony record for possession of narcotics, how was I going to get a meaningful job? So those, I mean, there were real issues, not just imagined anxieties. And yet in that next section of the book, I go through how he redeemed them in amazing ways. Family, the things he did, even with moving me and helping me to begin to work in business, and then eventually church, and then eventually become the director of that place that I was in to get help at the Calvary House, and then launch into ministry in Miami, and then eventually in Connecticut. It's a wild journey. So I can tell you this. I never expected any of that. I guess my hope was that somehow he might be able to help me out a little bit, bandage me up, and then I could have some semblance of a life. What he did is far beyond is all that I could have asked, thought, or imagined, and still blows me away when I look back, because sometimes I look at my life like a movie, like it's like, wow, what a strange story. And yet
it would be a great movie, by the way. It would be a great movie, by the way.
Listen, any agents out there, we're taking offers.
Listen, I actually know someone who I'm working with who is an old producer for The Amazing Rays. And
nice.
She just wrote a script and she's shopping it. And some people are, I can't go into it, but yeah.
Okay.
Who knows? Stay tuned. Bill, one of the things, it's interesting because this little anecdote that you just shared, when you were describing it, I sort of knew where, and maybe because I've heard the story before, I guess, I knew what was happening. But the one thing that kind of hit me as I was reading it, and thank you so much for the advanced copy so I can really dive into it. I remember thinking that a ship is always safe in the harbor. And the ship goes into the ocean, the unknown, the adventure, and also maybe the perils. And you were at a point in your life in which, listen, having a criminal record and having a drug problem and all the other things that you were going through, they weren't necessarily roses and unicorns, but it was a safety net because that's what you knew.
Hmm.
And for you to step away from that, it required you to go into the discomfort of not knowing and really trusting something other than your own understanding, right? Which that's my favorite verse in the Bible. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. It's up in the wall somewhere. But I thought that was very interesting. And what an interesting parallel. And I think that for many people who are in a place of maybe in the wrong relationship or in something that they know that they have this desire to shift, they're afraid because it's so easy to stay, even if we're in pain, right? It's so easy to stay in what we know as opposed to what we don't know. What's your advice for someone that is in this kind of turning point?
That's a great question. I think the best advice that I can have is you have to pick your pain. Everything has a pain point at some point. And though you can say there is a pain to stepping out and discovering something new, and the fear, there's a pain in the fear of what's going to happen if I do this. Understand that there's also a pain in where you stay. And just because it's the devil, it may still be a devil that you shouldn't be with, and it's still poking you with its little pitchfork or whatever it's doing in that moment. And you have to choose that. So in my life, for example, at that point, I had to choose to step into the unknown, which you're right, it meant discomfort. And I get into the idea of even the clothes I wore and the way I oriented myself. And then later into I even as a Christian, as I stabilized, I got comfortable. I was comfortable in Fort Lauderdale, and I had our whole little grid, we called it. I went to church. I worked at the church. We had our little safe friends. But for God to prepare me to do something bigger, like go start a church in Connecticut, he first had to get me to leave the county, sent me back over to Miami, down to Dade to work at a church. And that was uncomfortable. It was a risk because it was a big church I was leaving, and I was doing a startup. And yet God used that, and then eventually moved us over to Connecticut with tons of fear, tons of unknown, and tons of uncertainty. And I guess the thing that I would say is you have one life, right? You have one opportunity, and do you want to stay in the confines of something that you know you shouldn't, but because it's safe, or step out and take a chance because you really don't know what can happen as you summon the faith, summon the courage, summon the boldness to step into something. And it will be painful, by the way. You're not wrong to think that it's not going to be hard, but you might be under emphasizing how difficult it is to remain in the current situation that you're in, and that there's a price to that too. While there's comfortability, it still is something that God has more for you. And it's not just the pain of it. I think it's forfeiting the blessing that could come. Like when we decided to move, felt God calling us, we had a choice. We could have just said, no, I just want to stay in Florida. I want to do that. And I think we would have forfeited a great many things. We would have never got to know you, never got to know many people, got the joy of starting a church. But I think I have to now also, I can't just apply this to other people because I think it's true in every season of life. I have to think about it for me. Leaving the church when we did was one of the hardest things that ever, because again, and it was wrapped up with almost 20 years of it was part of your identity. It's your job. It's your purpose. It's what you do. It's my people. I love it. It's my home state. It's like all the things. And I have to tell you, it has, the last couple of years were a battle in that process of, well, what do I do now? Right. What's next in it? But I have had to remind myself and believe that God ordains the steps, and we've stepped out into that in faith. So I trust he has something ahead. I may not and don't fully see the picture for that yet, but I believe it's good because God has a good track record in my life.
Yeah, he does.
And what I hope that is relatable is in the moment, the outcome isn't guaranteed. It's easy. Like some of the chapters, the redemption chapters, it's like, it's nice because it's got a little bow on it. You see the redemptive circle and it's like, oh, that worked out nice. But I'm still living in open loops, just like everyone else. I still have things that are unanswered questions. And I guess that I'd say for that person in an open loop, unclosed loop, that you really have to make a decision and think through. And again, for the person of faith, what is God calling you to do? For the person that's not yet in a person of faith, what do you want more? What do you hope for more in your life? And are you willing to trade the pain of comfort and stability? And by the way, none of us, even our current comforts, all that could disappear tomorrow. That's not
100%.
either. Yeah. I think maybe the harbors that we think we find safety in are an illusion in some sense too, because our whole world will be disrupted tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I don't mean be on here doom talking. I mean,
no, I think it's a real thing. You know, I often share the piece of my story that, like you said, I had a great job. I'd been doing this for 20 years. I had climbed the corporate ladder. I had a great salary, and it really was in my heart to move to do something else, but I wasn't taking that leap because of the comfort. And all of a sudden my harbor burned down. So I had to take the leap, and I took the leap. And no, I didn't know certainly in 2020, I never knew what would be ahead of me in 5 years. But I know that everything that I did before today has prepared me for what I'm doing. And that's really where I think that, in writing this book, you share with individuals that even though it could be hard, even though it's, a lot of different things, and transformation is part of it, redemption is really what helps you go into whatever next steps you are, and you figure them out along the way. Bill, the idea of the book, The Rest of the Man's Show, is the title of the book. I'd love for you to share a little bit of that. What is the title of the book? What does it mean?
So I have to give credit to a 4-year-old boy who came up with the title of the book. It was great. I was doing a church service one time, and a woman comes up to me afterwards, and she said, the first thing she says to me is, "Well, I bat for the other team." And so I'm sitting there like, I don't know how this is going to go. That's a funny first thing to say to somebody that you've never met. I said, okay. And then she says, "I'm Jewish," which wasn't at all what I was expecting. But I said, okay. And she went on to tell me, "We were only here because my neighbor's daughter's being dedicated today. And we saw that, and we were going to leave right afterwards. But my son's 4, grabbed my arm and said, 'Wait, Mom, I want to stay and see the rest of the man's show.'" And I thought that was hilarious. Like, it's his perception of what a church is like. So he stayed for the show. The mom didn't even stay. She went out into the cafeteria, had a bagel or whatever. But he stayed. And she said, "I got to tell you, it was remarkable. You kept the 4-year-old's attention the whole time. And he repeated the 3 points that were your main sermon points to me, and it was left." And so we talked, and she was very kind. But like at that moment, it was more than 15, probably close to 20 years ago. I locked that away. I said, "That's a great book title." I just like it, I'm a collector of ideas and things, even words that are out of style, I think are funny. I'll like lodge them in my head, or ideas. But I wrote that one down and said, "I'm gonna make a book someday." And so, but then I forgot about it for many years and just did that. And so, when what happened and sort of how it got, and I had little nudges like you along the way, healthy taps to kind of do that. But when I was up last year in Montana in a mountain, a retreat called the Trinity Encounter, I felt God really giving me the vision to write a book. And as I began thinking about the ideas, and it was clear to me that there was sort of the 3 moves: brokenness, redemption, and then transformation. And healing, and moving into more of what God has for you. And so then I thought, I was like, wow, because I had another working title, but then I'm like, no, this is The Rest of the Man's Show. And so and so the idea is for broken people for all of us, because we've all had brokenness in some way, shape, and form, to see that there is redemption available and that there is transformation available, even if you've been stuck for a while in certain cycles or habits or seasons of life, that there's more.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in from the perspective, I wanted to be able to appeal to people that were not Christians, but that would be open to reading from the perspective of one that is their faith, and to see that there's more. But also to the Christian, because I feel like for a lot of people of faith that they leave money on the table, so to speak. Like if you look at deal making, they say you never want to leave money on the table. But I feel when it comes to Christ, that people leave money on the table all the time, and it's not, we can't negotiate with God. But what I mean is, Jesus came to save us, but not just so that we don't go to hell when we die. We go to heaven. That's great, but he wants more. Jesus has an abundant life, and that doesn't just mean prosperity or financial blessing. It's abundance of soul, of coming fully alive. And so I don't know if I was able to thread the needle with both, but I wanted to be able to appeal to a person that may be far from faith, but look and identify some brokenness and experiencing some transformation, or even the Christian who may look at my story and say, wow, that's wild. I never did anything like that. But my whole thing that I do along the way, as I'm telling my story, is I'm uncomfortably poking back at the reader, trying to draw out your story. And that's the hope, at least throughout the book, and saying, but where are you broken? You didn't do drugs, great. You didn't hang out with Marilyn Manson, that's cool too. You didn't go to jail, awesome. But you're broken somewhere.
You're broken.
I have more layers, more masks, whatever, but tear those down, because when you do, when we stop pretending and we embrace the brokenness, then we can move into that sort of redemption, healing, and transformation. So that was kind of the idea of it. I like, what's funny about the title, as I had a good friend who kind of pushed back a little bit and said, it's a bit too obscure because people don't know what the heck it's about. And he's right from a marketing standpoint, because from a marketing standpoint, I thought, oh, well, if I called it The Rest of Your Show, then the readers would like that, because it's like, it's about them and it's about this and who's the man, what's this and that. And so I thought it through, but I stuck to the original vision, because I felt like, the man isn't really me. It's like, even though I'm telling my story, the man ultimately is God. And
it's universal themes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I tried not to make it despite the title, a man book, so to speak.
I do like that. I do. And you and I had this conversation throughout your journey. And I do think that you did such a great job at, even though it says man on the cover, the themes are really relatable for humans, right? The one thing, and again, the book is broken into into three acts: brokenness, redemption, and transformation. And the book in the third act shifts from the story to really giving the reader tangible strategy and practical wisdom for mindset shifts and spiritual practices that can heal, help us grow. And I do believe that this is something that can appeal to such a wide range of readers. I want to ask, this whole concept of writing something so personal, did you hesitate to share vulnerable stories on the page?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. I did, and there was like when I wrote particularly the Act 1 more than the other ones, there were times where I'd get done and it felt like I just bled onto the pages, kind of a thing. Like I literally poured my soul into the book, and there were a few things where I'm like, I need to dial back a little bit. And so I, believe it or not, you might read this and feel like shocked. Understand that I did demonstrate some level of discretion, and that what I left in was intentional. My wife really helped me a lot, because when she read the original chapter, for example, on drugs, she's like, look, someone that's never come from this, it's kind of shocking. And so I rewrote that chapter. And it's better because I took it from the lens of what would someone who's never been down that road, but maybe even has a relative that made their life a living hell because they've been through it. Because we all know someone. If we're not, if addiction isn't our thing, we know someone who close to us probably who has or is struggling with it. And so that made me go back through because I was like, yeah, you're right. And it wasn't like I was trying to revel in, but there were some things I cut out that for the average reader might have been like too much. And then so but I left enough to where it wasn't just sterilized. Like it's still real, it's still raw, but I think it maybe helps someone to see. So if they can't relate to for example, that chapter they may not be able to relate with, but to read it, they might be able to understand a bit more.
That's right.
But the chapter before it or after it, they might put themselves right there and say, yeah, that's me. I struggle with, one of the examples that I was hesitant to get into because it's awkward for men, but I was on a retreat, and it's one thing we talked about is like body shame. I talk about short and dealing with weight and things like that throughout my whole life. And that's not like fun to write about, but but I remember being on the mountaintop with a group of guys, and we were talking about that, and it was just like, wow, like men don't usually, and one of them just said, I wish men would normalize talking about like body shame with each other more. Like women who are often trendsetters in many things will often be more open talking about that. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? I very few people think they have a perfect body in every people. There's usually something we find about ourselves that like I know God's God, but if I were God, I would have done this a little different. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like we look at that, and so but I tried to in Act 1 deal with some real issues and even like a life-threatening disease, because sometimes it's not just cosmetic, sometimes it's internal things that we wrestle with that people may not even know about. So I wanted to bring that out in Brokenness. So again, someone that might say, well, I don't relate to the drugs. Oh, but
I relate to that.
I relate to that. And then later in Act 2 and in 3, I deal with some healing practices to kind of help navigate through some of those things. So in that sense, a lot of the things in Act 1, I come back to later with how do you work through some of those things.
Yeah. I, in reading the book, and again, it's not my story to share, but well, I'm going to share it anyway because it's the podcast and Dan can edit it out if he wants. But I know that I've seen that kind of thought pattern also in Dan, which has normalized for me that men also have some of the same apprehension, some of the same fears, shame, everything that comes with when we look in the mirror and we're not the picture that we think we should be, right? And the should in quotes, because the world also has a type that is kind of saying this is what you should strive for. But I love that you do talk about it, and this is something that I feel very strongly why this podcast is here. I want us to, in a world of Instagram, know that other people struggle with the same things. Know that you may be seeing their perfect or what you think is their perfect life, but there are so many different things beneath the surface that are broken and have been in some ways really repaired if you're willing to take that step. Now, did writing the book feel like a form of therapy or closure in some of your areas of life?
Yeah, it's funny because of the different moves of the book, it felt like different levels of therapy or, you know what I mean? Like the first one, I got done. I even wrote in the interlude, like, man, I felt weird writing all that. Like, and it made me wonder, and I even pondered out loud, how are other people going to feel reading this? And I wondered, would it draw out, even as it drew out uncomfortable things in me, would it draw out uncomfortable things in other people? And then, of course, I urged them to read on because, like, it gets better. Like you just experience the black backdrop under which the diamond shines, and gleams even more. So it felt like very, I guess, therapeutic in a sense. And there was a part of me along the way that wondered, like, when I get done, is this just for me, or am I going to release it?
Yeah.
Um, as I got more into the redemptive side of things, it built up my faith, even because as like, that sounds weird, like narcissist. My book really ministered to me, but I know that sounds weird. I mean,
No,
writing out
I get it. I get it. Having written a book, there were
yeah.
things that I put in the page that I didn't think like, oh, I don't think I've ever talked about that.
No, you
And
had the thoughts, but you
yeah,
crystallized it when you
yeah,
wrote it down.
no.
And that's what happened is like, and I looked and said, oh, all this happened, God did this. So even though I have these still open loops,
Mhm.
I have to have the same God that did all this is still with me today.
Mm,
And that's what I need to trust going forward. And then I had a lot, I don't say fun, but the second half was a lot of fun to write because it got into a
mhm.
lot of the practices
Yeah.
and then thinking through, like, even though the story part is in half one, obviously, as you said, I'm a storyteller, like story, like humor.
Mhm.
So stories are still part of the second half, but it's not so much centered around a story.
Mhm.
It's anecdotes, things like that, because I want to make it palatable
Mhm.
and memorable for the reader. But I enjoyed very much the practice. It was a total shift in
Mhm.
how I wrote and even the emotions behind it. But you know what? What really moved me in that is one of the chapters I talk about is on gratitude and the importance of that as a discipline and how to do that. And so one of the things that I have tried to do along the way is whether it be you, hey, you put this book on my head idea, send a text or say, hey, Julie, thank you so much. Like that was meaningful. And as I think about, when I wrote this book, and part of it's my story, but I realized it's not just my story. It's my mom's story.
Mhm.
It's my Mrs. DeShong, my 10th grade teacher who
Yeah.
spoke life into me. It's like, and so all these people that probably won't write a book or have that. And so anyone I
Mhm.
knew that I could still get in touch with, if I mentioned them in some positive way,
Mhm.
I sent them a PDF of that chapter and said, thank you for the difference that you made. So in
Mm.
some ways, that was even just healthy for
Yeah.
me. So in some ways, to answer your question, yeah, a different kind of therapy. Like I realized there were some long overdue thanks and some that I needed to say maybe for the 10 millionth time
Mhm.
again. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a wild experience. It kind
It
of took me
is a
on an
wild
emotional roller
experience.
coaster.
It's a roller coaster. It's a wild experience. By the way, I loved some of the other things that you shared, and we've talked about Rebecca, but I loved your story of how you still have the little packet where she wrote of sugar or a sweet and
A
low
sweet
that
and low,
she
yeah.
sweet and low where she wrote her phone number, and I thought that was so sweet and such a great thing for people to relate to, right? And she is that companion that has been by your side, and you have three beautiful daughters.
Mm.
You also talk a little bit about healthy conflict within marriage, and I like hearing that because I do believe that there is healthy conflicts in marriages. But the other part of it is that you know your role as not the boss of her, but the leader of your home. And that was something that when I married Dan, first of all, I will say when I was in high school and everybody wanted to get married, I never wanted to get married. And then when my friends started to get married, I thought, why would you want to get married and have a boss, and tell you what to do? And then especially
Yeah.
that scripture that says, the woman has to be submissive to man. And in high school, our male friends used to kind of say, oh, you're going to be my wife and you'll be submissive. And I'm like, no way, Jose. And when I married Dan, I realized that we're equal partners, but that he is also able to lead, but his leadership takes into account Julie and takes into account my well-being and takes into account the direction that he feels is best for the two of us.
Mm.
And yeah, so I'm all on board with him leading. And I think that, you show that a little bit in there. You've navigated several different seasons also in your life. You've navigated moving to Connecticut, establishing a church, having a church that is established and is looking to go in many different directions and minister. For husbands that are listening, or perhaps wives that are listening on behalf of their husbands, and they're going to um, have them listen. What is the hardest part about having what Dan and I call these courageous conversations with your spouse. And how does your faith impact the conversations?
Just to clarify, when we're in the middle of a difficult conversation, decision has to be made, and we don't necessarily see eye to eye, that kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think first of all, what really helps, and I learned this a long time ago, is have a regular meeting. I remember one time, my old buddy Bob Barnes said this, and I've never forgotten it, is many times conflict happens not just about the point of conflict, because you don't know how and when to have conversations with your spouse. And he said, for example, and I could relate to this, and I laughed to Rebecca, because as it's us, it's like, I'd put my head down on the pillow, I'd lay down, and then she wants to have a conversation. And as Bob Barnes said, the bed is for one of two things, and neither one is having a conversation.
Oh my gosh.
And so I remembered that. And so that helps, so that we don't because I'm going to be up all night thinking and tossing and turning about it. And you feel relieved, so you just go right to sleep. The other thing that maybe helps is, I know it sounds kind of funny to say it, but have a staff meeting with your spouse, because if you have regular times, a weekly, and it doesn't have to be formal, you don't keep Robert's rule of law, you don't have to run it like a board meeting, but just a recurring time. What that does is, if there's something that's bothering you, that it doesn't have to come up in the moment. You have a place to discuss it. And possibly by the time you get there, you realize, I was just kind of being, is me. I need to let it go. Or no, I need to bring it up. But this is the time where we don't just talk about difficult things. We talk about good things. We talk about the whole thing. So having regular times. That said, when it comes to, and I'm going to speak from the role of my Christian faith, because I think that's how we navigate, is you said this whole idea of, spiritual leadership, and the idea that sometimes guys can just say, well, hey, you're supposed to submit to me as the husband. Well, it does say that, but if you're going to quote that, you need to really zoom out and look at the whole context, because it says, wives, submit to your husbands, but it also says, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. What did Jesus do? He laid down his life, sacrificed, and he gave up his life for the church. By the way, it also says submit to one another in love. So the idea is, it's not always a one-way submission. But the idea is, I think that most women, even women who have a hard time, even as you did, with the idea of leadership and submission, and hey, but I'm a girl boss and I run my own company, and how am I going to come home and have a guy boss? I don't think that's really what Jesus is asking of you. I do think, at one sense, he establishes a family and says, I'm going to put the guy as, for whatever reason, God decided, right? Maybe because we probably would just be happy if he said the girl could be in charge, but he wants to challenge both of us, right? Whatever, that's speculation.
That's true.
He says that. And so then for us, the opportunity is to say, okay, God, well, first of all, am I yielded to you, first of all, because I want to make a decision in the best interest? Second of all, am I listening to my spouse, because I want to hear from her ideas, her perspective? And I gave the idea of that chapter that I thought was fine. I listened to my wife, and I'm like, you know what? I submitted to her in the sense of, you're right. And I listen. And so in other cases, she gave suggestions. I'm like, nah, thank you, but I'm going to do this.
Thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, but it wasn't like, but she knew that I listened to what she had to say. And I think, like in any company, but also in a relationship, people are usually okay if you don't always go along with what they want, as long as they know you've got their best interests in mind and you've listened to what it is that they have to say and contribute. And, one of the things I look at is, like, for example, I knew a guy, he was in ministry, and he was in like missions in Africa kind of a thing. And his wife, couldn't do it anymore. And she just said, I can't do this anymore. It was dangerous. And so he boldly, at a pastor's conference, said, so I left my wife and went and I'm like, whoa, I think because your ministry is your number one, your marriage ministry. So I said, man, at that moment you blew it. And so, for example, that moment in Connecticut when I made the decision, I loved our church, and it broke my heart, but I had to put my number one ministry number one and look out for her And so sometimes it means a big, hard decision like that. More often it means daily decisions, dying to yourself in lots of different little ways. So I guess that's the thought on, and we don't do it perfectly sometimes.
Yeah. No.
I'm human, she's human,
Yeah.
but at least we have a framework to kind of circle back to and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we got off kilter here. Let's reset, reboot, and kind of begin to operate in this. And that has served us well over the years.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever shared this with you and Rebecca, but I remember the day that you announced that you were moving to Florida, or because the girls and Rebecca were there already, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of people really knew that. And I saw Rebecca in the cafeterias. We were setting up bagels or whatnot. And I asked about Emily, your oldest, and where is she going to school? Does she know where she wants to apply? And she said she was thinking of Florida. And I kind of put that in the back of my mind. We went into the service and I saw Rebecca, and all of a sudden I turned to Dan and I said, they're moving to Florida.
Mm.
And he's like, don't be ridiculous. And then all of a sudden you talked about it. And he's like, really? How did you know that? Did someone tell you? I said, no, it just kind of like, it just, I don't know, made like little pieces started to kind of fall into place for me. And I know that was, a courageous step from your perspective, but it was also difficult in the sense that there are times in which what we love doing and are good at doing clash with the things that, our family life, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of that. And how did you and Rebecca, or how do you and Rebecca kind of navigate the seasons where maybe the ministry or the ambition of growing in a certain place kind of clash with family life?
That's a really good question. So I had to learn early on, because the first year of the church, I was working full time still, sales, and I was doing the church, and I didn't have a day off every week. Maybe 2 days off in 1 year. Well, there's this thing called the Sabbath and trusting God, and I wasn't doing that. And I'm like, that's not a great example to maybe it's a great example of, hey, he'll work hard, he'll sacrifice. It's not a great example of kind of trusting God and taking time to replenish. And so after the first year, I began to take a day off. It was 5 years later before I began taking like 2, and with one of those being flexible kind of a thing. But the idea is I had to kind of learn with ambition and desire to see that grow and flourish, that I also had to trust God. And I realized, early on, I guess, that full-time job that I had working in sales, I give the analogy like I was juggling 3 things, and I'm not a very good juggler. So I always dropped one of the 3 things, and it was work. With the sales, it was the church that we were getting started, and it was family. And it always seemed like the family ball was the one that got dropped because I had to pay the bills. We were here on mission. And then that helped me realize I needed to prioritize that. And it was a struggle throughout the years because there are just seasons of sacrifice. Like right now, we're close to Easter. Every pastor in any church everywhere, they're working probably more hours than they should be. But it's okay if it's a seasonal thing, but it shouldn't be a permanent kind of a thing. So I've had to learn that balance. And, it wasn't always successful. There were times where I was out of bounds, but I do like to think I at least got it right in that moment when it mattered, and, chose my wife. And again, it was difficult, and I probably didn't even handle that right. We didn't know how and when to tell that, because the church was in such a fragile place with not even being in our home and bouncing all around, and the instability of that. We probably should have talked to the church sooner, but we were trying to figure it out as we went along. But I think that helped. And now it's weird because we're learning all over again. What is it we do? Like, I'm working with a church on a temporary assignment now. I'm enjoying that. Wrote the book and, doing some promotion stuff for that now, enjoying that. But we don't know come June, come September, what does life look like? And we're in that process of trusting God now. So we are trying to take time to solidify, well, what is our relationship look like? What does our family look like? And trying to dream and imagine and lean into what God's vision is for that future. And again, we're in a place of uncertainty. We've been in places of uncertainty. We're back in a place of uncertainty. So I can tell you it's easier to navigate now because we don't have all the same pressures and busyness, but we trust that time will come. And I hope some lessons we've learned from this time will carry us into, in a more healthy, balanced way, whatever that next step is. And I'm not entirely sure yet.
Yeah, so good. So good. I know that you definitely are in a season of life in which there's so many different things coming, and your girls are growing up, are grown up. I mean, they're beautiful young ladies. Like I feel so old every time I see them online because I'm thinking, yeah, this was a little baby when I first met them, and they were so young and adorable. And I even when they got to middle school and they were in Sunday school, I thought, oh my God, they're getting so big. And now they're just young women. So your relationship also as a family is shifting. The girls will move on, go to college. And, you've definitely grown in a relationship with Rebecca that even though she was present to the kids, you were at the head of the family. Now you also kept that connection with your wife so that you're not strangers like many people tend to be when kids leave for whatever. What is your advice for individuals that maybe are in that cusp of things changing for them, and maybe they have a bit of disconnection or have grown apart from the relationship with the person that they're with?
That's a really good question. I think there's one single word answer that I'll expand upon, and that's intentionality. Is because you live together doesn't mean that you're doing life together.
That's right.
You can be roommates, basically, in a marriage relationship, and the things that bound you together, in our case, ministry that we worked on together, our kids that we raised together. We got one left at home for another year, and she's off to college. And then we're about just over a year away from being empty nesters ourselves. And so we're already looking at what that looks like. So for anyone in that situation or close to that situation, intentionality. And what does that look like for us? Rebecca and I, we, living back in Florida again, we like to do the things that we never got to do, like go take a beach walk once a week. And when we walk along the beach at sunset, it's a good time for us to talk together, hold hands together, unpack what's going on together. Tonight we're going out on a date night, just kind of like date nights are still important, dating your spouse and making sure that you're investing relationally, filling their love tanks. If you read the 5 love languages, whether it's touch, quality time, words of affirmation, are you doing those things? And I can't say enough that part of the intentionality might be if you've hit some impasses and like you just some roadblocks, there's nothing wrong and probably some good things right with going and seeking counseling and sitting down with someone to help you navigate through those things. It isn't too late. Like you may feel that way. You may feel like you've hit a dead end and a barrier. And in some cases, a lot of people in those moments choose, well, I'm just going to go, I found the wrong partner. Maybe you've become the wrong partner. I mean, because it's easy to shift. Maybe you guys are both in a different place. And I'll tell you, Rebecca and I talk about this all the time. And I know it happens. Look, people lose their loved ones and things happen. But I tell Rebecca, I'm so glad that we don't have to navigate this wild world we live in. Dating now, with all the online things and that you hear and navigate.
No, thank you.
Exactly. And my sympathy I've heard some wild stories of friends that have had some bizarre dates that kind of happen, and some good ones too. So that got married and all that. But just like thinking that through, like it's not as easy as you think to just start over, because you're still carrying yourself, you're still carrying your scars, your wounds, your baggage, your brokenness, all that stuff. And maybe what the opportunity is, and I'm not. Again, I get some relationships, there's abusiveness and other things that may make it irreconcilable. In most cases, though, I think it's reconcilable. And I think that effort, intention, and again, some outside inputs could help and go a long way. I think the worst case scenario is to just kind of keep drifting along and feeling that separation happening without stopping and saying, let's do something about this.
Yeah. great piece of advice. And the one thing I learned, especially because Dan and I both had practice marriages, the one thing that I learned is that Dan is not in charge of my happiness,
Mm.
but I am in charge of his. And for as long as I think of what can I do to make his life easy? What can I do and take the eyes off of me?
Mm.
We're in a good spot. And I know that he does the same for me when he does the little things like maybe getting me a new light and putting a cover on it so it doesn't blind me, or maybe even putting the dishes in the dishwasher. These are the things that the mundane that makes the things that matter last, and strengthen them. So I,
Absolutely.
yeah, so good. I could talk to you all day. I mean, this is like you and I are very chatty, and I know that there's a lot of different things that we can go down, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that there is a spiritual practice that has changed all of us. And as you walk through individuals through the redemption part, I think that people can see different ways in which they can incorporate practices into their life to really go through a transformation.
Hmm.
And I'd love to hear one thing from you. If you had to talk to yourself, not when you were in middle school or when you were in your Marilyn Manson days or going through some of this recovery, but 10 years ago, Bill, 2015,
Hmm.
what's the one thing that not you didn't tell yourself, but what is one thing that maybe you wish someone had told you?
That's a really good question. I think the thing that I wish someone had, it's going to sound silly, like I should know this, but I think that it would have been helpful for me in that position to say, make sure you are investing in the health of your soul and your
Mm.
body on a more regular basis. And I think with that, what I mean by that is I think sometimes we separate our mind, soul, spirit into compartments, but it's all integrated. And the way they work together, like if my body doesn't feel good, my emotions and my mind isn't good, my heart's all over the place. And I wish that I had put more priority into physical health and just strengthening that when I was young, because it's harder, older you get, the harder it is to maintain and
Oh,
keep
yeah,
that up.
tell me about it.
Yeah, it's just gravity gets worse somehow. I don't know, but also to your own soul, because it's easy to be ministering to other people and serving other people and then almost neglect yourself. It's kind of like the shoemaker's son, right? Their
Yep.
shoes never get fixed.
Yep.
And it's kind of like in your own way, you can pour yourself out and pour yourself out. And that I wish I had been taking care of myself in that regard. And that may apply to other people. I know not everyone is in ministry, but you're all serving others in some capacity, shape, and form. But are you tending to your own soul? Are you tending to your own body? Are you taking care of the things that will make you healthy, mind, soul, spirit? Because 10 years later, it matters. Even that day and that week and that month, it matters. I think I wouldn't have been ready for a lot of the other things I might think of to tell myself now. Like I just wouldn't have been ready for that. But I think if that had been impressed upon me more 10 years later, I would have been better off for having
Yeah. And it's
spent more time.
wonderful wisdom that you're sharing, because I do believe in so many different ways we put ourselves last. And, this podcast, we have a lot of women who tune in and some cool dudes, but we really tend to say, I'm going to do this, and we neglect ourselves. And when we are not in a good place mentally, physically, emotionally, and connecting to it, at least for me, right, with prayer and God, I know that I don't show up in the best way that I can for others.
I think it's right.
Yeah.
I think it's right. And by the way, thank you for all the women tuning in to listen to a dude. Thank you for letting me be in your space.
Well, listen, we love cool dudes at Casa De Confidence. You have given us so much, and I cannot stress enough. I read the book once. I'm going through it again because I know that I probably missed, and I don't often read a book back to back. I do read it maybe multiple times, but not back to back right away. And I do, I know that I miss other things, and I'm really digging into it. Maybe it'll be a little book club for Dan and I here at home, and people can join us. We'd love to have it, our listeners rather, go and get the book. If you maybe, are in a different walk of life that maybe doesn't include a relationship with God, and I would encourage you, because the themes of this book are human themes, things that all of us can take into account to create a life for us, and to know that, listen, redemption is real, transformation is possible, and that we all have a story, but we are able to turn the stories around that need to be turned around, and really lean into the things that we've been gifted with as gifts for others and for ourselves. Amazing. How do they find the book? And we're going to have all the information in the show notes, but I'd love for you to share. Where can people find you? Where can they find the book?
You can find me at the website restofthemanshow.com. It has all my socials and things on there. You can find the book available in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover at amazon.com. And if you say you don't want to deal with Amazon, it's on Ingram Spark, so you can order it at your favorite book retailer. Or if you're like, I don't want to pay for your book, have the library order a copy, and you can check it out from there, which is cool too. But those are the places. And again, all those links will be on my site as well.
Yeah. Well, and I want to encourage the listeners, number one, if you have heard this conversation and there are things that have tugged at your heart, or you really feel like, wow, that's insightful, I'm so glad I listened, I want to encourage you to go and connect with Bill and send him a DM, get into his DMs and let him know what is the one thing that really stood out for you, something that touched you, because it's encouraging for all of us to know you are going to become Bill's believing mirror, believing in his message and helping him know that putting his story on paper is definitely doing the thing that he wants to impact this life, this world, the lives of others, and really continue to share some of the things that are meaningful. Connect with him, share the book, and this conversation. I know that you also got something out of it. I know that there's someone in your life that needs to hear this conversation. So I want to encourage you to go and share this episode with that person. Bill, if our listeners are going to be doers and not just listeners, they're going to go and implement one lesson from everything that we've talked about. Something quick, easy, that it's easy to do. What would be the one lesson you would encourage them to add into their life?
I'm going to share, in case you never get the book, it's the first chapter in the transformation thing. My counselor said to me one day, "You're a dump truck." And what happened is I was moving along in life, every experience, every brokenness, I was just thrown in the back of my truck, and I kept cruising down the highway of life. He says, well, one day you're going to find yourself broken down in the emergency lane of life. You can't go any further because you're not dealing with and processing it. And so in that chapter, it's called Process Regularly. It's the idea of stop, pull over, jump in the back of the dump truck and start finding things. What are you carrying around with you? Because we're all carrying something that's slowing you down, that's weighing you down, that's smelly, that's nasty. And I know we don't want to get into it. I would rather keep driving, but dig in there and don't. The exercise is don't go in and start trying to fix it. Just name things, just inventory things, write them down, group like things together, process things. From there, some things will be self-evident of what you need to do with them. I get into a lot of practices with the other things like dealing with shame or guilt or unforgiveness or abuse, whatever you may find grouped in those things. But I think, what was it Plato said the unexamined life is not worth living, and the idea is we need to examine ourselves, because in order to find healing and redemption, we got to know what we're working with. And I know that's like, man, that sounds so basic, but you may operate very much like me. You know it, and yet you just keep hitting the gas and driving down. You're filling stuff with your dump truck. Stop, pull over, find out what's there, process it. Once you do that, you'll be ready to say, well, what are the next steps I need to take towards my healing? Because I know the garbage that I'm dealing with better than I thought I did a little while ago.
That's so good. That's so, so good. Well, Bill, I want to say thank you for taking the time to come to Casa de Confidence. And I want to let you know that the way I see your story is very much like the Japanese practice of kintsugi, where you take broken pottery and you mix it with lacquer and gold and silver and platinum, and it repairs that pottery. But it's more than just repairing the pottery. It's making something new of what it was. And this is a great philosophy. And I know that this is something that you've done and you help others do. So I encourage my listeners to go and connect, go and find Bill, give him all the currency, leave a review, and share this episode. Thank you again for being here, Bill.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, so much fun. My friends, don't forget, go confidently in the direction of your dreams.
Thanks for listening to Casa De Confidence. We thank you for listening, and if you want more, go to casadeconfidencepod.com. Check Julie out on her socials as Julie DeLucca-Collins. And you can also check out her website at goconfidentlycoaching.com. Have a great week, and don't forget, go confidently in the direction of your dreams.
Hi, everybody. I know that sometimes we get very lonely in this entrepreneur journey, and I want to invite you to join us into our limited time only Purposeful You Mastermind. For many of us entrepreneurs, we believe that we can do it all. But the reality is that doing it alone only creates a lot of overwhelm. So join us at the Purposeful You Mastermind. You can find out more information by going to bit.ly/Julie's Mastermind. This is going to be the place where you are able to then unlock your full potential and achieve long-term success for your business. Push you behind your current limits, expand your connections, discover new ideas, and implement them with confidence. You're going to get the support in all aspects and transforming you to the six-figure business you've been looking for. Pause and get off the hamster wheel if you've been spinning around. This is a time where you can get that support from like-minded entrepreneurs that are here to join you in your journey. Together, we can challenge the assumptions and land the speaking engagements and opportunities we want to grow our business and make an impact in the lives of people. See you then. Remember, you can find the mastermind at bit.ly, Julie's Mastermind.